Leslie Rogers is with us. I'll introduce her more formally here in just a second, but I want to go through some of the steps we go through every week. The first one being, what are you grateful for? What is it that drives you to get up in the morning? That would be gratitude. Being alive. Well, that's not what I'm grateful for today. I'm grateful for the courage to be vulnerable. I've been tested with that lately, and I'm so excited about being able to say that today, especially in front of my friend and colleague, Dr. Rogers, because we talk about that a lot, and we expect people that we talk to be vulnerable, or at least have a desire to strive towards discovering that vulnerability. We're going to talk about that in a broader, bigger umbrella called mental health. Our theme today is mental health flow and sports performance. How does your mental health flow and helping you adapt to all of those people and things that come at you and challenge you to be your best? Now, I say it that way because there are times when the challenge doesn't seem like it's helping me to be my best. We're going to talk about that a little bit as well. And making those connections with mental health issues that influence elite athletes is part of my metaphoric background. But we're going to talk about mental health issues that face non-athletes as well, and try to build a bridge between the two focuses on today's show. Because Dr. Rogers, she comes from that more traditional, I'm not trying to downplay it, but it's the more traditional mental health area. She's got some specialties, and that's where my bridge comes now to introduce her more formally. I am so pleased to introduce you to Dr. Leslie Rogers. She's our guest today. She is also the creator and host of Mental Health Talk, which I've had the benefit of being a participant in with her on her broadcasts on Clubhouse. She has other platforms that she broadcasts her show, Mental Health Talk. She is a person who has worked with first responders, military personnel, and has wonderful experiences and stories she can share with us about the FBI as it highlights her wonderful career. Now, I'm guessing if she has to tell us about the FBI stuff, she might have to kill us, but we'll risk it. We will risk it. Good morning, Dr. Leslie Rogers. Welcome to the show.
Good morning. How are you? Thank you for inviting me as a guest. I am so pleased and honored.
Well, I tell you what, it's not often you have opportunities to meet people that just kind of connect with you and click, and we have discovered that for certain on my side. I know you and I have talked about it briefly, but part of that connection is what I want to share with our audience today as well, because you and I have shared ideas about the bridging of psychological theory into different genres. You've got your genre that you've worked with over the years. I have my focus, which is in the athletic elite and executive world of business at the C-suite level. So today, even though we may talk about metaphors based in sports and military experiences or first responders, those people who are fighting risk and frustrations on a daily basis, but one of the things I try to do every week is start off the week with a mindset moment. And this week's mindset moment, I think, captured a bridge for both of us. It begins to build that first step towards yours and my conversation. And the quote goes like this from our mindset moment, which is every Monday we post it. I find with depression, one of the most important things you can realize is that you're not alone. You're not the first to go through it. You're not going to be the last to go through it. So says Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. And I just thought that was very appropriate, that a person of his magnitude, his physicality, his drive to win, shared that kind of sensitivity and insight. So, Dr. Leslie, here's my first question for you. When you have your therapeutic approaches that you apply, would you alter your therapeutic approach in dealing with an elite athlete versus a non-athlete?
Absolutely. That's an excellent question. Therapy is an individualized approach. So there are different therapy models used for different people. For depression, for example, whether it's an athlete or a veteran, or other, depending on what the presentation is. Therapy is different. It's not, it's modified on a case by case basis, which is why it's so unique and so effective.
I like that you say that, because it also takes away, we're going to talk about myths and stigma so that we can discuss coping methods, but when you say it that way, it allows an athlete to not feel like they're ill. I've had coaches approach players and say, you need to go see a therapist. You're just out of control. Well, I'm not sick. So they have a perception that to be suggested that they need therapy or guidance emotionally or mentally, that they're sick.
So what you're saying is underlying, so that's a bit different. That's an underlying stigma or an underlying belief that, going to see therapy, I'm weak. Or it's like embarrassment, shame, or guilt is what you're talking about right now.
Exactly. And that's where I want to continue to build our bridge with each other about that you're in a group. People have difficulties. There should not be any separation from it. It's going to be a unique approach to address what your needs are, regardless of where you come from or what you do for a living. So when you have that approach to everyone, what are some of the things that mystify or are stigmas about mental health that you've heard about?
Absolutely, and here's another excellent question. I'm so glad you're bringing this up on this platform, because myths do exist, and I just had this discussion on my show last night. So there are several myths. Myths are beliefs that we have that aren't necessarily true, and they're important to know because guess what? They interfere with therapy. They can interfere with our mindset. They can interfere with our belief systems about others, right? And so when we talk about myths, one myth in particular is mental health is the same as mental illness. Mental health is the same as mental illness. And it's not. It's not the same. In fact, mental health actually involves being able to function and engage in day-to-day activities that often result in productive activities such as work, school, caregiving, healthy relationships, the ability to initiate and form relationships is under mental health, ability to adapt to change and cope with adversity. Hey, listen, we all go through stressors. That's just a part of life. We go through stressors. But mental health involves being able to navigate through stressors, like being able to go to work on a day-to-day basis and do your job effectively, right? In sports, being able to play a game and have high performance, right? So that's mental health. As opposed to mental illnesses are diagnosable. They're treatable diagnoses. So it's different from mental health. With mental illnesses are cause significant changes in thinking, emotion, and behavior. Significant changes in thinking, emotions, and behaviors. And distressmental problems in functioning in social, work, and family activities. So remember, mental health was being able to function in multiple settings, right? A mental illness interferes with that ability. Like with depression, mental illness, depression interferes with the ability to possibly get up in the morning out of bed, right? Interferes with the ability to be engaged with others, right? It could involve with social withdrawal and things of that sort. So mental illness is different from mental health. That's one huge myth. And there's a list of myths, and we can talk about that if you'd like.
We're going to go through some of them, I think, and we'll hit on them as we get more questions. And extending on what you just said, one of the things that comes up is that, athletes as competitors are asked to, just get it done, step up, be stronger, you've got this, all these different, what sound like motivational epithets, that you're trying to encourage the participant, the player, the team. But many times what the coach sees isn't necessarily the foresight, the forward behavior of mental illness as much as it is a degree of lapse, the lack of coping. You're still mentally healthy, but you're just not managing the participation, which then affects the way you deliver the outcomes. I try to equate it. I was watching the Olympics and track and field, and pole vaulting is one of the athletic events in pole vaulting. So in pole vaulting, if you don't have the pole held at the right end, you're not going to get enough bend in it to get yourself launched over the bar. And I think that mental health sometimes, I don't have a handle on the pole well enough to give me the leverage to deal with the obstacles that I face. But that doesn't mean I'm mentally ill. And too often at the elite level, any little piece of something or someone that alters your ability to deliver at the highest level, it's a failure. Stop. Give it up.
Mindset, right?
Say that again.
That's that competitive mindset, right? That competitive mindset says that if I can't perform up to the ability, then I'm a failure, possibly.
Yeah, and left untouched, with coaches seeing those signs, left untouched, it could in fact lead to mental illness because they've had to self-manage that. The analogy for me that connects back to you is the experiences you've had with military personnel that come back from theater in violent situations, and they come back and act out those issues that they didn't have anybody to work with them on, and they manifested in physical abuse towards family, abuses of alcohol and drugs, those kind of things get themselves into a bad place. We don't have as aggressive of an output of that with athletes, but we have less, still aggressive, but less talked about. We have players that cut themselves. We have players that do self-abuse. Sometimes the sport itself aids them in that kind of self-healing. You know, the harder I hit, the better I'll feel. You know, I'll get it out of my system. But that still doesn't mean they've managed their mental health in a way to prevent it tipping over into a mental illness. Do you see any connections between that, what I see in athletics, to what you've seen in your experiences?
Absolutely. Let me go back for a second. I just want to say, you mentioned that with athletes, the coaches may, say, hey, let's get the job done. You got to get it done. And that pressure, right? That pressure, that athletic pressure, I'm going to call it, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily lead to mental illnesses. So mental illnesses sometimes have a prerequisite, right? Maybe it's childhood experiences or experiences as an adult, but it doesn't necessarily lead to a mental illness being a sports player. Remember, these girls or guys or women in sports, they are groomed for this, right? Oftentimes they're groomed for this sport. So then, when they get into these sports environments, it's like a reinforcement of what they've been groomed to do, right? So that mindset doesn't necessarily come when they become players. It's sometimes a prerequisite, sometimes prior to becoming a player. So I just wanted to clarify that. So
I'm glad you made that distinction, Leslie, because that's really the tipping point for me. What do we arm the coaches with so we know that they maybe they've discovered something about the player's past? We've got a lot of players like gymnasts, for example. They leave home for months and months at a time, away from their family, and the people they're surrounded with, they're supposedly trusted. Well, there's a huge lawsuit that put a doctor in jail because of the ill-advised behavior that these young women were subject to. Now, I don't have any personal insights on any of the gymnasts that experienced that with that doctor and whether or not that's pushing the envelope towards mental illness. But that's an experience that you're referring to. Something in their childhood, something in their past that's not a part of the sport that affects them adversely, emotionally and mentally.
Yeah.
And I want to build the bridge to understand that, for coaches to be able to understand that.
Absolutely. So now I'll go to your parallel between military and athletes. Now you mentioned something that's really important, which I didn't realize. Sometimes these athletes may go off away from their families to go to training, etc. I used to say to my veterans when I was doing therapy with the VA, I used to say, guess what? You were born by your families as a child, then you grew up and were reborn by the military. The military gave birth to another child.
Yeah.
So everything that you learned, all those morals and those ethics and values and things that you learned growing up in your home, guess what? that goes all out the window, because once you get into the military and you go off to training and etc., then you're relearning, different types of experiences. You're relearning, right? So all that other stuff goes out the window. So when you talk about that, that's a parallel, right, between athletes and the military, because they relearn how to behave, they relearn how to think, right? They have to get the job done, right? They relearn how to respond. You have to, and sometimes in relearning how to respond, that means that you can't respond emotionally in a certain time, right? You have to be, the word may be stable. You have to be more or less emotional, less vocal about your emotions, right? And this is where, when you think about it, if you think about it, which kind of makes sense, this is where the emotions become silenced. The emotions become silenced because a lot of veterans said to me, Dr. Rogers, I wasn't able to express my emotions when I was in combat. If I did, how could I do my job? We were there to save lives, right? So if you think about it with athletes, the same concept. If I fall apart, how can I do my job? How can I get the team to the home run? How can I, make a win? So that same kind of mindset, that competitive mindset versus the saving lives mindset. But the underlying thing is, you have to be up to par. You have to be able to do your job. So that parallel there is interesting and important to know when thinking about having discussions with athletes, because you want to normalize their experience in order to validate what they're feeling, so that they can know that, okay, it's okay for me to talk about mental health because it's important, and I'm not going to have any negative consequences. There may not be any negative consequences.
You remind me of some experience that I've had with special forces, and typically over the years, athletic programs would bring in special forces people, black ops people, to talk to them about discipline, resiliency, these words that are part of both vocabularies, both in the military as well as in athletics. The difference, however, is we, as a person bringing those people in, I have to remind them about the consequences of your efforts in the military are different than the consequences of the efforts of the athlete. So make sure you're mindful when you tell your stories that these are still kids. They don't know about the details and the gore and the heartache and the emotional swings that you've gone through. Now understand, most of the time those military personnel that I've invited are seasoned veterans. They've been in these audiences before. They've learned to describe to them. But you made a point about the parameters of success. Like a military person going through a door, breaking through a door, knowing there's hostiles on the other side. They've been trained to understand their heart rate so well, they know when it's at 140 beats a minute. And that's the optimal. Athletes don't understand that kind of discipline. That is so cellular, so organic in the discipline. Whereas athletes, they're just about, I'm strong, I bench press, I run fast, I catch. So one of the mental and emotional controls that we have to use with athletes is crisis. They don't know about crisis. So when crisis hits them, it's different than a military personnel, a veteran, or heck, even a firefighter. So the stories we're hearing recently with athletes reminds me of how they've not been prepared to understand what the signs of crisis look like in their behavior, and are they coping well enough? So my next question for you is about what are some of those mental health demons that could cross into both camps? The first responder camp that you've dealt with, the athlete camp. Are there common demons that they may face when things get critical for them, when the pressures get so high? Here's what you need to be aware of, maybe as a coach or an administrator. When you see these athletes doing this, they may be facing some demons that are going to be harmful to them mentally.
Yeah. Again, so when we talk about crises, the crises may be a bit different.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Veterans, these crises often result in PTSD because they're in war zone countries and not necessarily in combat, because you don't have to have combat, experience that have PTSD. But I would imagine with athletes, that the failure can be quite traumatic, right? So I work at University of Memphis, and I work with athletes there. And oftentimes I would find that, like, if you were hurt or if you were injured and couldn't play the game, that was very traumatic for the player, right? And I understand that when these kids or adults get into sports and get into NFL and things of that sort, this is their life. This is their career. So when something happens that interferes with that career and performance, then the question that I would ask was, what now? What do I do now? Right? Because then you feel useless, hopeless, right? Helpless, like there's no other options. And that's when you start thinking about potentially suicide and things like that, right? Depression and things like that. Because again, this is their life. This is what they've worked up to. So when that's gone, then what next, right? So being able to talk about alternatives, like when athletes are injured or et cetera. Like, for instance, I would talk to this track star at the university, track star. And, other options that she hadn't thought about was possibly coaching herself, because she was brilliant, right? But when she hadn't thought about that, the first thought that came to mind was suicide. But when we started processing through and talking about it, have you ever thought about consider being a coach? You're excellent. She was like, wow, I never thought about that, right? So being able to restructure thinking, negative thoughts, and being able to talk to them about other options, because you guys are in a place where, or the coaches are in a place where they know these teams, right? And they know what they're good at, they know what their strengths are, their weaknesses are, and being able to have that dialogue with them about other options. When you're talking about mental health, again, being able to have these discussions. And I think you and I talked the other day, and I was like, the baseline of discussion is awareness. Start creating awareness around mental health. Listen to what you're doing, and I applaud you for doing this. Creating awareness around mental health. I think that Simone Biles and Naomi Osaka has opened up a huge door to allow you. This is a perfect opportunity to start jumping out there and creating awareness about mental health and letting these guys and women talk, right? Letting your coaches talk. Well, and start to normalize this.
And Dr. Leslie, you bring up another point. I'll add another athlete to that equation. Michael Phelps, major success. And to your point about coaching, he was in a state of depression after the Olympics, because he was asking himself, what do I do? I'm not in the same pattern of behavior. I'm not doing the same activities. I'm lonely because of that. I'm not hanging out with the same people. So coaching was an alternative for him. Now, he's taken it to another level of coaching. He's not actively working with single athletes, but he's coaching broadly, to larger groups, to other coaches. In addition to that, during his time as an athlete, he discovered the influence that, he's known about his learning disability for years, but he didn't realize how that learning disability awareness and presence had motivated him as a kid. His mother was a great voice box about, and she's an educator herself, that if it wasn't for ADD, he wouldn't have been in swimming. ADD saved him, or swimming saved him from the black holes that ADD can put kids into. Now, as he got older and successful as a swimmer, and he started to feel depressed, it wasn't about the ADD. So he had this contrast he could look at and discover for himself, because he was aware. So he survived through his down times on his own with family, but that's not always the case with all athletes. Like Naomi Osaka, for example, when she was at the Australian Open, her team wasn't aware. They weren't aware of the triggers. They weren't aware that she didn't have coping mechanisms to deal with the concern and fear that press caused her to feel when they were around. And the organization, here's what bothers me, Leslie, the organization that ran that tournament, all they were focused on was the rule. Every athlete, after so many minutes of finishing a match, must go into the press and do a press conference.
I know that.
And yeah, and that rule alone, if they just would have let up on that, it could have done wonders for Naomi. Now, she still may not have wanted to show up, but it would have given her an opportunity to take a breath, deal with it. But who were her advocates? Who were there to help her? So she has a team, and similar kinds of things came out in a more positive way with Simone Biles. They knew about the twisties. The coaches knew about twisties. Other players knew about the twisties. And that's what got her, pardon my pun, twisted around in dealing with this, because people didn't understand. So coaches came to her defense when asked about Simone. Players totally supported her. That's a big difference, a positive difference compared to what Naomi Osaka went through. So environmental awareness, awareness of your peers. Now that takes some vulnerability. You know, you've got to be able to share. Yes, exactly. So when you're dealing with the folks that you deal with, both therapeutically and maybe it's just as an advisor before it gets to a more critical stage for them, what kinds of things do you ask them to be aware of so that they can help manage their presence and their feelings within those moments?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
What are you asking the people that you practice with about being aware? For me, for example, I ask my players, if you're starting to feel a little bit pressured up because of the nerves, take a look at the details, move your head around, change your view, don't get into tunnel vision. See the details of the flower, not just the flower and its color. You know, see the detail in your uniform, your shoes. You know, really pick up on those things so that you can stay channeled into the purposes that benefit you. What are some of the things that you might share with your colleagues and patients about awareness?
Yeah. So when I was actively practicing, is becoming aware of triggers. Again, that's really important. There are environmental triggers. There are cognitive triggers, like thinking triggers. There are emotional triggers. There are behavioral triggers. Be aware of your triggers and write them down. You know, sometimes it's helpful to make a visual of what your triggers are and write them down so that you can communicate them. Sometimes the triggers, I think, are unconscious, where they're not readily available yet. They're not up into the surface. So that's why I encourage writing them down, because if you write them down, you say, oh, wow, that was a trigger for me. And then go a little further and start processing why they serve as triggers. And that gives you a lot of information, a lot of great information when you process through what the triggers are and why they are triggers. For example, someone walks up to you and touches you on the shoulder and you become like triggered, right? It's not because he touched you on the shoulder, it's because of something else. So going deeper and kind of thinking about that, right? Sometimes sometimes it's an underlying level of respect, right? A lot of times people are angered by feeling disrespected, right? That's a trigger for many people, disrespect, right? So understanding what underlying triggers are so that you can communicate them, because the key is communication. How would I know if something's going on if you don't communicate with me, right? I can only assume. So when you ask the question about it was something like, how can you intervene, or how do you know when to intervene?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes you don't. But I will say, again, it's being knowledgeable of your players, right? Coaches, I would imagine that before players come on the team, there's a background, right? You guys have your fouls, you guys know where they come from, you have biometrical data on them, right? So knowing your team and then knowing the behaviors once they come on the team, and knowing that if there's any deviation from those behaviors, from any deviation from characteristics, right? Again, I told you before, you and I were talking, I was like, you know, if a player is usually upbeat and upgoing, laughy, happy, but then, you know, you're starting to see a change in behaviors, he or she's sitting on the sidelines, you know, not being engaged, then maybe that might be a light bulb moment to say, I wonder what's going on here. Having moments to regularly check in on your players and pull them aside. And I said this, and I'm going to say this and I'm going to end. One thing that I would really encourage is having like maybe a mental health day or workshops or something like that. Or even, you know, have a psychologist or a clinician on staff to have regular meeting days. That way nobody's singled out, because everybody has to go see. Say like if I was a psychologist, right? Everybody has to come see me, so no one's singled out. Because remember, a lot of folks, especially athletes and military, etc., do not seek therapy because of those myths. If I go seek therapy by myself, then I'm singled out, and then what does that say about me? I'm weak. But guess what? If the whole team has to go, nobody's singled out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that solves that issue, right? That concern.
Leslie, where do you put a safe space, what I call a safe space? Do you actually want to identify a physical space in addition to the mental health day to kind of have that review and reconnect kind of thing?
Yeah.
Do you see a benefit in having a kind of a safe space where athletes and people can go?
Yeah. So here's the thing. And this is what I would compare, is to have a team huddle to say, to introduce it, right? Hey, listen, this is what we're thinking about doing. Have an interactive discussion. Gather their thoughts as well. This is what we're thinking about doing, about having a mental health day where all of you guys will be involved. No one will be singled out. I want to get your thoughts on it. What are your thoughts on it? And again, the idea is no one is singled out. Everybody has to come see whoever that person is identified to be, right? Maybe it's once a month, quarterly, etc. On a schedule. That way it gives these persons, these athletes, a way to kind of process through. So listen, you guys are like support systems, right? Coaches and everyone around that team are like support systems. And it's often sometimes difficult to talk to support systems because they're closeness, because of that close bond and because of that relationship, right? That rapport and that relationship. So if you have someone that's outside of that relationship that's non-biased, that's non-judgmental, right? And sometimes we're judgmental, Dr. Whiteman, not intentional, but like, for instance, if I go to my best friends or they come to me, sometimes I'm a bit judgmental. Yes, I'm a psychologist, but they're my friends, right? My family. So you guys are like family, so it's a bit challenging sometimes to go to you guys and say, oh, Coach Whiteman, I'm feeling a bit suicidal. Because are you going to kick me off the team? What's going to happen?
Yeah.
Right? And I say that because even like when I talk about the FBI, we had clearances and weapons and things of that sort. You got to be mindful of there are potential consequences if I disclose what I'm feeling, because then what's the risk? It becomes a risk, and safety comes first, right? So that's why when you have this person, this non-biased neutral person in place, such as a psychologist or clinician, these folks have an outlet, right? And it's confidential. It's confidential.
Yeah, you make some really good statements about that privacy, that confidentiality. But even before we get to that extreme, it's having the athletes own it individually without being singled out. They own it as a team. It's part of our process. And in many cases, because they're competitive minded, they want to connect it to the winning process. If we are better mentally, we're going to be better at executing our plays, our strength and conditioning programs. Everything will benefit because we're doing it together. I really like what you said about that. We're going to come back to that in just a minute. Leslie, I'm going to take a moment to ask you a question about how do people get in touch with you? What's the best way to reach out to you?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking me that question. You can reach me on my website, www.mentalhealthtalk.lab. There's a form on the website that you can fill out if you'd like to be a guest on the show. Everything mental health, we talk mental health, feeding with awareness around mental health. You can also contact me on Instagram. Instagram is at dr.Leslie Rogers. I have a show on there called Men Suffer Too. A room on there called Men Suffer Too, because men do suffer too. And, they are really, I think that we need to pay special attention to the male population, because as we've talked about, that shame and guilt and embarrassment of reporting, we need to pay special attention to them and let them know that it's okay to have a voice. It's okay to, talk about your experiences around mental health. And I would really, really normalize that and validate it around the male population. So Instagram, I'm all over Facebook, guys. Dr. Leslie Rogers. I'm on LinkedIn and other outlets, but the main place is my website, mentalhealthtalk.lab, where you can also subscribe to be a guest on the show.
Leslie, after the mentalhealth.talk, what's the dot? It's not .com, it's dot what?
Live. So it's mentalhealthtalk.live, Live.
Yep, gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
So mentalhealthtalk.live.
I know, right? But me, big guys, I want to say this. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel because that's where my talk show is. My YouTube channel, Mental Health Talk with Dr. Leslie Rogers YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe because it's really important. Thank you.
And what's really nice about these shows, everybody, Dr. Leslie has an international footprint. So a lot of people come in from all over the world sharing their opinions and views. And to the quote that we started off the show on our Mindset Moment from The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, you're not alone. If you feel depressed, somebody else has felt it as well. There's always someone you can look forward to talking to help you through your moments as well as helping them through theirs. So in addition to that, remember, we're always streaming here at KUHS Denver. It is a 24/7 music and talk, all the genres you can think of. As Leslie pointed out before the show started, there were some great jazz riffs going on in the background as we were setting up. We've got that kind of music here for you, as well as everything from your neighborhood hip-hop to that international flavor of jazz and rock and roll. So check out KUHSdenver.com whenever you can for a good hook into information and music that benefits your heart. We've talked about a lot of stuff. We talked about myths about mental health. We've talked about the struggles that people have in just wrapping their brain and their hearts around the need to be mentally healthy. I said it the other day to somebody. I says, we're all mental. They looked at me kind of cross-eyed and go, no, I don't mean it in a bad way. I mean, we're all thinkers. We all use our brains to do something. Why don't we take as much care in the health of that as we do in the health of our body? I just don't get it, because nutrition fuels the brain as much as it fuels the muscles and other parts of your body. If you don't breathe, I had an athlete, Leslie, the other day asked me, Coach, this breathing thing you keep having me do, in through my nose, out through my mouth. I get it. It's really simple. I don't understand why it benefits me. I said, what would happen if you stopped breathing? Don't do that. I know what happens. I'm going to fall. I'm going to pass out. I got to breathe. I get it. But why like that? I said, scientifically, more O2 comes through your nose than if you breathe only through your mouth. And you need O2 to promote the brain. You know where oxygen goes to first as far as tissue in your body? Just take a wild guess. And then he shakes his head, rolls his eyes. He goes, I know, my brain. Yeah, you'd be right. And then it gets distributed throughout the rest of your body, because the body is really smart about what needs stuff first. Your brain needs stuff first, which is why Nike's slogan, just do it, needs to be prefaced by think first, just do it. Because you got to think. All right, so on with our questions, Leslie. Thank you for everybody for that wonderful break that we had a chance to take. We talked about triggers, and I'm very interested in your thoughts about when somebody is triggered. I understand there's going to be a degree of response, and everybody's degree of response is different based on their own trigger. But when someone is triggered, what should the people around them be conscious of? Should they see, if it's a highly emotional response to the trigger, should people step in? Should they be looking for something? Or should we just leave it alone and let them deal on their own?
Yeah, again, how would you know if someone is triggered unless there's external behaviors, right?
Yeah.
Unless they're like explosive anger, right? I would imagine that in sports, especially contact sports, there's a lot of anger, right?
Yeah.
I would imagine, yeah. So, the anger, giving them an opportunity to kind of step back and regress, a lot of redirection. But yeah, how do you know if someone's triggered unless you know that person's normal character or normal behaviors, right? How would you know that they're triggered unless they're said? Now, Let me tell you, not just, and I want to say this, make sure this clear, not just sports players become triggers, coaches become triggered too, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Coaches, I would imagine coaches become triggered too, because I've been watching sports and see a lot of anger outbursts, right? So that's why it's important, again, Dr. Whiteman, it's important again to have these discussions so that you can start implementing like coping strategies and techniques such as relaxation techniques, such as what you were talking about, which are oftentimes used for anxiety to release anxiety. And what you were talking about, that breathing technique,
Mm-hmm.
our body has a normal resting state, and that breathing technique, especially when you're anxious, allows you to return back to that normal resting state. So so things like that, tools like that, teaching coping skills and strategies, and teaching alternative behaviors such as when you become angry, this is what I like you to do. Because let me tell you, I teach anger management to a group of men, veterans. And the first thing is to become awareness. You already know when you're about to become angry because you can feel it. You have physiological symptoms that tell you when you're about to become triggered or angered, right? You can feel it. So when you feel it, that you have to act at that point, because it's like a opportunity. It's an opportunity to react, and if you don't react within that opportunity, then you explode, right? So anger, knowing your triggers, knowing your physiological cues, I call it physiological cues, behavior cues, cognitive cues, in order for you to respond before it gets out of hand. So teaching awareness.
I liked what you said, Leslie, about the people around you knowing you. Now that requires some sharing and some vulnerability. Because if you know, as you pointed out, you've dealt with people that they have anger spouts and they need to know how to control that, but knowing when it's an onset is key. Now, the piece I'm talking about with my athletes and coaches is that they are vulnerable enough to share, hey, when this happens to me, just stay away from me. Or if this happens to me, just come up to me and say, is there anything I can do to help? You basically give me my coping mechanism to help you with your anger or your outburst to the trigger. I don't know if you've had these experiences before, but I've been around athletes that regretfully we didn't find out they were an epileptic until they were in a two-a-day in football, and they went into an epileptic fit at the water fountain. And if I hadn't been around, nobody else there knew what to do. They just basically let the player writhe on the ground, thrashing around on the ground. And I knew the techniques on how to manage that. I knew how to make sure, looking at whether his tongue was in compromise, because he could have choked.
So that's what I asked earlier. You guys don't have get medical records and things like that before they become?
It depends on the sport. In high school, no, we don't have. There's HIPAA rules. So unless moms and dads sign a waiver, which isn't always asked for, you don't know. In college, it gets a little bit more detailed based on the fact that you have a scholarship, and in that scholarship document, you agree to honoring certain requests for information. That doesn't mean we get a good profile. We many times find out after the fact. When it gets to the pros, look out. The minute you go to the combine in preparation for being drafted, you are poked and prodded beyond belief, which is, for a lot of players, that's a huge surprise to them. They've never been examined to that level. So, we know everything from sickle cell issues to MS to, any disorder they may have. Doesn't necessarily kick them out of the sport, but would definitely limit them. I've had players who couldn't come to Denver to play football because they said they had sickle cell anemia. The high altitude and lack of the arid climate would put them into a very compromising physical state. So you bring up a very good point, Leslie, about what more we need to do to build the bridges for a more comprehensive, focused look at health in general, but mental health in particular.
Can I say something real quick?
Absolutely.
That's important. When you told me that not always they get that information, gather that information, my eyebrows went up.
Yeah.
Because it's important, because when we talk about mental health, these can potentially result in mental health issues, right? And you're playing a sport, and then you move on up to high school or college, and you're told that you have this illness that you can no longer play. Wow, that can be traumatic. So being able to gather this information, I would imagine in high school, because high school is when you guys recruit, right?
Yeah, and there's a huge gap in our data gathering in high school. A privatization of the information, the HIPAA rules guide us. I'm not saying they don't in college, but it's a different set, because now these athletes, they're of majority. They're 18 or older, so they can make decisions on their own. And for scholarship players, the scholarship document that they sign allows us access to more data.
Okay. Yeah. And it's college when you recruit, not high school.
Yeah, we recruit out of college to high school. So we want to know, a college coach who's recruiting high school players wants to know but doesn't get that information. You know, we're always wondering, okay, has that ankle healed? How many broken bones did they have? Have they had any surgeries? We tend not to get that information unless when you went to see them play a game, the kid had a brace on his right leg. And then you'd probably have a good guess they had surgery. So you roll the dice, recruit them, give them a scholarship, and then we find out the specifics.
Yeah, but a way around that is like with HIPAA, informed consent.
Exactly.
Informed consent, and then release of information. That, I would imagine, that would be extremely important in high school, so that they can go on to the next level.
Yeah, and moms and dads that are very active in their child's sports life can be asked that question, but and some comply. They give consent because their child is 17 coming into the sport for their scholarship signing, but then they turn 18 in their freshman year, and then the athlete can take charge of their own destiny going forward. And on the physical side of things, that's one aspect, but the mental side of things is what really, the level of maturity is still growing and emerging. So it concerns me that the biggest area of support that needs to be applied is that time between high school and going into college, so that we can get more accurate profiles of these athletes, and their families can help us with that, so that if something, look at kids outside of the sport, Leslie, some of these kids are being brought to another part of the country that they've never seen before. An urban kid who's now put in a suburban campus, that's wide open and lots of fields that they have never seen before, or vice versa. A rancher kid that comes into heavily urbanized campus in New York or the East Coast. Those are traumatic experiences for them.
And that's a valid point, because when I was working at University of Memphis, some of these kids were from Australia and other countries. And one in particular, when they became injured, the greatest fear was, I can't go home, because they're coming here to be successful.
Yeah.
So the fear is, I can't be returned home without being successful, because how that's going to look for me. Again, those judgmental, societal norms or societal judgments or societal pressure. So going back home has those, negative emotions and anxieties and things of that sort.
So Leslie, we've talked about awareness. Now I want to bridge awareness issues into environment, because of the fact that there's a reality that human beings will move from one environment to the next, and then in that movement be surprised that it's different. And in that difference of that environment, it triggers some things in them. So do you have any advice for people about when I go from, let's say, a small town person to a big town experience? Is there any preparatory things, any sense of awareness they can do to get ready for that nuance, that change? And once they're in it and they're facing some triggered moments, what are some coping mechanisms you can offer for them?
When you say triggers, in my mind, so correct me if I'm not understanding.
Yeah.
So like if a kid is taken from out of inner city high school and makes it into the big leagues and then becomes like a successful person, right? It's a shift. It becomes a great shift in mindset, right? Needed a shift in mindset. And that maturity we talked about earlier, that maturity level, sometimes these kids are taken from their environments and put into another environment, such as these sports places, and they don't have time to kind of readjust. It's like the maturity, they're immature sometimes, immature, not able to readjust, and then they're given all this money, right? They're given all this money and they're given all this responsibility. It sometimes, I would imagine, be a lot of pressure, a lot of responsibility, right? They have to grow up really, really fast, right? So I think that, my coping would be, again, intervention between coaches and the athletes as well. Intervention, pre-intervention, being proactive again. Being proactive meaning not being reactive, being proactive meaning you have something in place. When you take these kids or young men out of environments and you're having them into sports areas, environments, have something there to greet them. Have a psychologist there to meet with them on a regular basis to kind of help with that adjustment, that transition. Have people in place.
Let me give you a specific. A lot of kids that come from a inner city background to a more wide open campus. One of the triggers is it's too quiet. There's not enough noises that I remember from my home. Traffic sounds, people moving around, the people at my own home. So they don't sleep. It's too quiet. And they're having trouble just getting to sleep because the rhythms are different.
Yeah, I don't think, with that example that you're giving, I think that it just takes, it's a transition. So I just think it takes normal time to adjust. Like, it's an adjustment. And that's what it sounds like you're talking about. Like, you come from, like, for instance, perfect example. At the FBI, I was working shift work. Mm-hmm. I was working 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. every night. Every night, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. During the daytime, I would sleep all day, right? When I started working at the VA, my hours were 7 a.m. to, right, 7 a.m. So it was an adjustment. It was something I had to get used to, right? It was in a new environment. I wasn't used to the environment. It was in a hospital setting. Everything had changed from law enforcement to now being a doctor. It was a shift in what I was used to, right? So I think that it's about getting used to becoming acclimated to the new environment that you're in, becoming acclimated. So when you say triggers, I'm not sure.
Here's why it's a trigger, because there is no training for the athlete on how to acclimate. They've never been given the insight, either from their growing up, how they grew up, because that environment was always what they had. They never had anything else. Now they come here, and there's this whole new environment. Well, nobody told them about it. Nobody said it was going to be quieter.
I think, where I'm getting confused. I don't think it's a trigger. I don't think it's the right word.
That's the only word I've ever been able to kind of fit to it, because
it's almost like you want to kind of help them to adjust by putting something in place to kind of help them adjust and help them adjust well, like help them with sleeping, help them with, because if they come and you say that it's too quiet, what are you going to do, put noise in?
Well, and that's what we actually have done. We gave them headphones.
Headphones, which is a good, so it sounds like you're putting things in place to help, and does it help?
It has with some. With others, we discovered other background stuff that they had difficulty with that causes them to, they went to sleep in these very noisy environments because that was a way for them to get away from it. And now they didn't have the threats in the quiet environment. Quiet meant there were not the same threats. So it's always interested me, the mental conditioning that we need to do with our athletes because of where they come from, the environment they came from and where we're putting them, and that we as coaches need to be aware of those differences so that we can create strategies on emotionally balancing that.
Yeah, I get it. I understand. I just don't think, from the mental health perspective, I don't think triggers is the right term. I know what you mean, though. I think what you're saying is having them, because it's an adjustment. They're adjusting from being it's almost like culturalization and reculturalization, right?
Yes.
Military veteran goes away to a war zone area, you know, he has to be culturalized there, and then he has to come back to the U.S. and he has to be reculturalized, right? It's the same thing as, you know, taking these kids wherever they're coming from their homes, whether it's low SES, high SES, middle class, etc.
Yeah.
You know, there's an adjustment. I would imagine there's an adjustment that they have to get used to, because they have to get used to being away from their families. They have to get used to being with unfamiliar places. They have to get used to living in dorm rooms or wherever they're living at. You know, that's not their home and not their bed. It might be noisy at their home. It's not noisy where you all are. So,
yeah.
But putting things in place, being proactive, like you said, getting headphones, and again, talking to them about what can we do to help you adjust and assimilate more easily. What can we do?
Yeah,
and having a discussion.
I have, as I'll equate the head coach to the commander in the military. They're less likely to be patient for the adjustments to be put in place to get the performance.
Imagine.
Yeah.
Imagine.
So
yeah.
I've been
So
faced.
I just
Go ahead.
I just want to really quickly say what triggers is, because we've been using that word a lot. So triggers, when you talk about mental health, triggers can promote mental the experiences of mental illness, such as like a trigger might be, for a veteran, a trigger might be hearing loud noises because he comes from a war zone area. So when I was working at the VA, they were doing a lot of construction because they were building different buildings and things of that sort. And some of the veterans were triggered because when they would come there for therapy, it would they would have flashbacks, because it would put them in a position where they felt like they were still in war, because those loud boom, 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 you know, those things that go into the ground. You know what I'm talking about? The drills. When they would hear that noise, they would get triggered because it would remind them of their experiences in combat.
Yeah.
So triggers, right? Emotional triggers. Like for instance, COVID, on this COVID pandemic on TV, all we see is death, 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 right? So maybe you might have like an experience in your family where your family had a family member caught COVID. So then maybe the media or whatever you've heard about COVID triggered like low emotion, because now it triggered anxiety, because what you've heard in the media is people are dying from COVID. So now your mother or someone has COVID, and now you have anxiety and low mood because you're like, is my mother gonna die? Right? So triggers are like, I associate them to, it helps you feel a certain way because of past experiences, present experiences, triggers for anger, right?
Yeah.
And things of that sort.
And giving you an example of the sleep situation I mentioned with an athlete, we've had athletes that came from inner city communities. When they weren't sleeping, the things they would do was call their mom. Because quiet was not a good thing. If it was quiet, something bad happened. So when it was quiet in their rooms at the football team, they would call mom, an auntie, a grandma, and share with them. But you're right. The use of the word trigger has a specific reference in therapeutic glossaries and language. And I'm looking for a different word because I have to deal with coaches who want it simple and quick. Give me an answer now.
Let's talk about it more offline.
Yes, we will.
We can come up with another word for that, because I understand what you're saying, and I can come up with a word for you.
Please do.
But I don't think it's triggers. But yeah, I can help you come up with a word.
In the last couple of minutes, Dr. Leslie, please share with people what you would like them to take away, and once again, how to get in touch with you.
Absolutely. So again, the importance of mental health and mental health discussions is to provide awareness, right? You have to have a baseline somewhere, right? And the baseline starts with awareness, and it starts with dispelling myths about mental health and about therapy and other things, right? It starts with dispelling myths in order to destigmatize stigmas. You know, there's stigmas. We all have biases and stigmas and things of that sort, and we have to talk about it. And what other place to talk about it than on forums such as this? Again, I would recommend having something in place, being proactive. A lot of times we're reactive, especially when you're talking about organizations. When you're talking about sports, you're talking about an organization, and things doesn't happen. They're reactive because when something happens, oh, let's put this in place, let's put that. But by that time, it's too late, right? So why not be proactive? We're having these discussions. You're processing through techniques to use. So have something in place so that when the next person, because we already have 2 or 3 athletes out here saying that we're struggling mentally, right? Have something in place so that when they struggle, because they're people. When they take their athletic hats off, guys, they're people. When I take my Dr. Leslie Rogers hat off, guess what? I'm Leslie. And I go through life stresses. We all do, right? Without having those negative consequences. So mental health awareness days would be important. Workshops would be important. Crisis intervention teams, or a person that deals with crisis intervention would be important. Because the advantages of it potentially saves lives. You know, people think of suicide. It potentially saves lives, enhances performance, and normalizes discussions. Again, my name is Dr. Leslie Rogers. I can be reached via my website, www.mentalhealthtalk.live. I'll think about my email address. mentalhealthtalk.live, guys. Thank you.
Dr. Leslie, it's always a pleasure. I'm looking forward to our next interaction, talking about mental health and how we can move that forward in a positive way, because guess what? We're all mental. We just got to think about it in a way that makes it better for us. I enjoyed the time we spent today talking about how to build the bridges between sports mental health issues and those issues that all of us deal with. We're all the same. If you feel alone, you're not. Others have felt the same feelings that you have felt. It's just a matter of finding those people and sharing your thoughts. Hey, KUHS Denver every Friday, 11 a.m., right here with 360 Performance. I'm Dr. Lowell Whiteman saying have a great day and enjoy the weekend. Take care. Okay, we're off mic.
Now, was that just a mic, or was that just audio, or was it video too?
It was well, both, but when we're now, they see you and they see me still, because Henry hasn't turned off the cameras yet, but they don't hear us.
That was bad. That was awesome.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. I'm going to continue, as I said to you, Leslie, I'm going to continue